Hi, welcome. In this lecture, we will study risk, expected return, and diversification. This is one of the most important foundations in finance because almost every financial decision is made before the future is known. A firm may invest in a new product, a factory, a technology platform, an acquisition, or a market expansion based on forecasts. But actual outcomes may be different from those forecasts. Sales may surprise us, costs may change, competitors may react, interest rates may move, economic conditions may shift. That uncertainty is what brings risk into financial decision making. In finance, risk is not simply the chance of a bad outcome. Risk means uncertainty about future returns or future cash flows. An investment with a wide range of possible outcomes is riskier than an investment whose outcomes are closely clustered around what we expect. The key idea for today is this. Investors require compensation for bearing risk, but not every risk is treated the same way. Some risks can be reduced through diversification. Other risks remain, even in a well-diversified portfolio. So, as financial managers, we ask not only how uncertain are the cash flows, we also ask which part of that uncertainty matters to diversified investors. Let's begin with expected return. Expected return is the probability-weighted average of possible returns. That sounds technical, but the intuition is simple. We imagine different future states of the world, assign a likelihood to each state when possible, and consider the return that would occur in each state. The expected return summarizes the center of that distribution. It is important to understand what expected return is not. It is not a promise. It is not a guarantee. It is not necessarily the return that will actually occur. It is also not always the most likely return. It is a summary measure. It tells us what investors would expect on average if the same type of investment opportunity could be repeated many times under the same probability structure. For managers, expected return is closely connected to expected cash flow. When a manager evaluates a project, the manager thinks about possible future cash flows, the likelihood of those cash flows, and whether the expected benefit justifies the investment and the risk. The formula can stay on the screen behind me. What matters for our understanding is the logic. Expected return is a disciplined way to organize uncertainty. It helps us avoid focusing only on the best case, only on the worst case, or only on the most comfortable forecast. Expected return tells us about the average outcome, but it does not tell us how uncertain that outcome is. That is why we need measures of total risk. Two investments can have the same expected return and still have very different risk. One investment may have possible outcomes that are tightly grouped around the expectation. Another may have outcomes that are spread widely across very good and very bad possibilities. The common measures of total risk are variance and standard deviation. Variance measures how far possible returns are from the expected return, while taking probabilities into account. Standard deviation translates that idea into the same type of unit as the return itself, which makes it easier to interpret. When standard deviation is higher, possible returns are more dispersed around the expected return. This is a measure of total risk. And notice something important. Total risk includes both upside uncertainty and downside uncertainty. In everyday conversation, people often use risk to mean danger or loss. In finance, risk is broader. It means outcomes may differ from expectations in either direction. Managers care about this full range of possible outcomes because uncertainty affects planning, financing, liquidity, and operating flexibility. Expected return gives us the center. Total risk tells us how spread out the possibilities are. Now let's move from a single investment to a portfolio. This is where finance becomes especially interesting. Portfolio risk depends not only on the risk of each asset, but also on how the asset returns move together. The key question is not only how risky is this asset by itself. The deeper question is, how does this asset behave when it is combined with other assets? To answer that, we use the ideas of covariance and correlation. Covariance tells us whether returns tend to move above or below their expected values at the same time. If two assets tend to move in the same direction, their covariance is positive. If they tend to move in opposite directions, their covariance is negative. If there is little linear relationship in their movements, covariance is close to neutral. Correlation takes the same basic idea and standardizes it, making it easier to compare across different pairs of assets. When assets move closely together, diversification benefits are limited. When assets do not move closely together, diversification becomes more powerful. So correlation is central to diversification. The lower the correlation among assets, the greater the potential reduction in portfolio risk. Let's now separate portfolio expected return from portfolio risk. Portfolio expected return is straightforward. It is the weighted average of the expected returns of the assets in the portfolio. In other words, each asset contributes to the portfolio's expected return according to its weight in the portfolio. This part is linear. If an asset has a larger weight, it has a larger influence on the portfolio's expected return. If it has a smaller weight, it has a smaller influence. Portfolio risk is different. Portfolio risk is usually not just the weighted average of the individual risks of the assets. Why not? Because assets interact. The risk of a portfolio depends on each asset's own risk, but it also depends on how the assets move together. This is the heart of diversification. An asset may be risky by itself, but if it does not move closely with the rest of the portfolio, it may still help reduce overall portfolio risk. Investors do not hold assets in isolation. They hold assets as part of portfolios. Therefore, the contribution of an asset to portfolio risk may be very different from the risk of that asset standing alone. That is why the portfolio perspective is essential in modern finance. Now let's focus directly on diversification. Diversification is the reduction in risk that occurs when assets with imperfectly correlated returns are combined in a portfolio. The intuition is very natural. Poor outcomes for one asset may be offset by better outcomes for another asset. A company may face a setback while another company performs well. One industry may struggle while another industry benefits from different conditions. One type of asset may be sensitive to certain economic forces, while another may respond differently. Diversification does not require assets to move perfectly opposite each other. That is a common misunderstanding. Diversification can reduce risk as long as assets are not perfectly moving together. The formula on the screen shows this formally. The important part is the final component, which captures how the assets move together. That co-movement term is the reason portfolio risk can be lower than a simple average of individual asset risks. This is why a risky asset is not automatically bad for a portfolio. What matters is how much risk that asset adds to the portfolio as a whole. For diversified investors, the relevant question changes. They do not ask only, is this asset volatile? They ask, how does this asset affect the risk of the portfolio I already hold? Let's think more carefully about correlation and the number of assets in a portfolio. When assets move perfectly together, diversification provides little benefit. The assets rise and fall as a group, so combining them does not remove much uncertainty. When assets have weaker co-movement, portfolio risk can fall meaningfully. When assets tend to move in opposite directions, the risk reduction can be even stronger. This gives us a central lesson. Portfolio risk depends on co-movement, not just individual asset risk. A risky asset can improve a portfolio if its returns do not move closely with the rest of the portfolio. Now consider what happens as the number of assets increases. As a portfolio becomes broader, asset-specific surprises tend to offset one another. A product problem at one firm, an operational disruption at another, or a management issue at another may be serious for each individual company. But in a broad portfolio, those events may be diluted. The benefit of diversification is usually greatest when moving away from a very concentrated position toward a more diversified portfolio. After a portfolio is already broadly diversified, adding more assets may still help, but the additional reduction in risk becomes smaller. Diversification changes the relevant risk question from risk in isolation to risk contribution inside a portfolio. This brings us to an essential distinction: firm-specific risk versus market-wide risk. Some uncertainty comes from sources that are specific to a firm, a project, an industry segment, or a narrow group of companies. These sources may include product success or failure, operational disruption, litigation, loss of an important customer, management problems, supplier issues, or cost overruns on a particular project. Other risks affect many firms at the same time. These are market-wide sources of risk. They may include changes in the overall economy, interest rates, inflation, credit conditions, investor risk appetite, exchange rates, energy prices, or supply chain conditions that affect many businesses. Firm-specific shocks can be severe for an individual company, but diversified investors can reduce exposure to those shocks by holding many securities. Market-wide shocks are different. They are harder to avoid because they affect many assets at the same time. This distinction leads to two major concepts. Unsystematic risk is firm-specific, project-specific, or industry-specific risk. It is also called idiosyncratic risk or diversifiable risk. Systematic risk is market-wide risk. It is also called market risk or non-diversifiable risk. Total risk can be understood as having both systematic and unsystematic components. That distinction is crucial for required return and valuation. Now, let's ask a very important question. Why do diversified investors generally not require extra expected return for bearing diversifiable risk? The answer is competitive capital markets. If a risk can be reduced at low cost by holding a broader portfolio, then diversified investors have little reason to demand compensation for bearing that risk in any single security. Suppose a firm has a great deal of uncertainty tied to a company-specific event. That uncertainty may be very important to managers, employees, creditors, and the firm itself. But a diversified investor can reduce exposure to that event by holding many other securities. Because that risk is diversifiable, it should not by itself increase the required return in a standard market-based cost of capital estimate. This does not mean firm-specific risk is unimportant. Managers absolutely care about it. It can affect financial distress, strategic flexibility, borrowing capacity, reputation, and even survival. The point is more precise. Diversifiable risk is generally not priced as part of the required return for diversified investors. The risk that remains after diversification is systematic risk. That is why later models of required return focus on measuring sensitivity to market-wide risk. In valuation, the discount rate should reflect the systematic risk of the cash flows being valued. Let's finish by applying this framework to managerial decision-making. Managers often feel pressure to raise discount rates whenever a project feels risky. But that can create a problem: double counting. If a downside scenario is already included in expected cash flows, adding an additional discount rate penalty for the same risk may make a valuable project look unattractive. A disciplined valuation process separates expected cash flow estimation from discount rate estimation. Project-specific operating risks should be reflected in expected cash flows, scenario analysis, sensitivity analysis, or risk management planning when possible. The discount rate should reflect the systematic risk of the cash flows. So here's the practical decision question. Is this risk mainly specific to the project or firm, or is it tied to broad market conditions that diversified investors cannot avoid? If the risk is mostly project-specific, it often belongs in the cash flow forecast or risk management analysis. If the risk is systematic, it is more likely to affect the required return and the discount rate. In practice, the distinction is not always perfectly clean. Many risks contain both firm-specific and market-wide components. But the framework is valuable because it forces us to think carefully about what type of risk we are pricing. Thank you for joining me today.